The Cathedral of Morofel had been built to silence women like her. Serwyn knew it the moment her bare feet touched the obsidian tiles that had drunk the blood of 7 generations of queens. The vaulted ceiling stretched so high above her that the torchlight could not reach it, leaving the upper reaches in a darkness that felt watchful. 3,000 wolves had gathered in the great nave below the dais, their breath rising in pale clouds that mingled with the incense smoke. Every face was turned toward the altar. Every face, except hers. She kept her eyes lowered as the matriarch led her up the steps, the white silk of her ceremonial gown whispering against stone. The crown in the matriarch's hands caught the candlelight and threw it back in fractured spears. A crown of bone and silver, twisted into the shape of a wolf devouring its own tail. The crown that Corvin Ashvale, Alpha King of the Iron Wastes, would place upon her head before the sun rose. The crown that would make her his queen in name only. She had been told what to expect. The matriarch had instructed her in every gesture, every word, every breath. When the king turns to face you, lower your eyes. When he takes your hand, do not hold his. You are his vessel. You are his treaty. You are not his beloved. She had nodded through every lesson without arguing. There had been no point in arguing. Serwyn had been chosen for this throne, not because Corvin wanted her, but because the Council of Wolves had decreed she was the last living daughter of a bloodline old enough to legitimize him. Her family had been slaughtered in the war. Her village had been razed. She had been hidden in a convent of silver-bound nuns for 11 years before the council found her. She was 16 when they took her from the convent. She was 19 now, and in the 3 years since the binding, the man who had married her had not spoken her name even once. He called her wife when the courtiers were watching. He called her my lady when the servants were near. He called her nothing at all when they were alone, which was almost never. The matriarch stopped at the foot of the altar. "Lift your eyes, child," she whispered. "He comes." Serwyn lifted her eyes. Corvin Ashvale entered the cathedral through the eastern arch, and the 3,000 wolves below the dais dropped to one knee in a single rolling motion that sounded like a wave breaking. He wore black. He always wore black. His shoulders were broad enough to fill the doorway, his hair the color of wet iron, his eyes the pale gray of a winter sky over the sea. There was no warmth in him. There had never been warmth in him. He climbed the dais steps without looking at her. This was the 3rd anniversary of their binding, the night the old laws required him to renew the vows in public. The night the kingdom would witness once again that the Alpha King had taken his queen and would father an heir upon her before the next winter. 3 years they had been waiting. 3 years the council had whispered. 3 years Serwyn had lain awake in the chamber adjoining his and listened to him pace the floor on the other side of the wall. He had visited her chamber 11 times in 3 years. She had counted. She had counted because there was nothing else to do. And on each of those 11 nights, he had been with her with the careful, distant courtesy of a man performing a duty he despised. He had not kissed her. He had not spoken to her. He had not stayed when the visit was over. She had wept the first time, the second time, the third. By the 11th time, she had not wept at all. Corvin took his place at the altar. He did not look at her. The matriarch began the words. Serwyn heard them the way one hears thunder behind a closed door, by bone and by blood, by silver and by flame, by the breath of the first wolf and the howl of the last. The litany rolled through the cathedral like a slow tide. She answered when she was supposed to answer. She knelt when she was supposed to kneel. She offered her left wrist when the ceremonial blade was drawn, and she did not flinch when the silver tip opened the old scar. A drop of her blood fell into the chalice. Corvin offered his own wrist. The matriarch drew the blade across his skin. His blood fell into the chalice and mingled with hers. He still did not look at her. She had told herself, on the carriage ride to the cathedral, that tonight would be different. Tonight, she would tell him. After the ceremony, when the courtiers were gone, when the corridors were empty, when there were no witnesses to make him perform, she would knock on the door between their chambers, and when he opened it, she would say the words she had carried alone for 2 months and 17 days. I am with child. She had imagined his face 100 times, the cold version, the surprised version, the suspicious version, the indifferent version. She had not allowed herself to imagine the kind version because she did not know how to picture it on him. But she had hoped, in the smallest folded place inside her chest, that the news might crack something, that the child might be the thing that made him see her. She lifted the chalice. She drank. The blood was warm and it tasted of iron and of him, and as it slid down her throat, she felt the bond stir. The bond she had carried for 3 years like a sleeping animal. The bond that had never woken because he had never let it. Tonight it stirred. Tonight, for the first time, she felt him on the other end of the thread. Her breath caught. She lifted her eyes to him without meaning to, and for the first time in 3 years, Corvan Ashvile looked back at her. His face did not change, but something behind his eyes did. A flinch. A flicker. Something like a man who has just heard a door open in a room he had locked years ago. He looked away first. The matriarch took the chalice from Serwyn's hands and raised it high. "The vow is renewed," she called out, and the cathedral rang with the cry as 3,000 wolves rose to their feet and howled the answering oath. "The bond is sealed. The queen is the king's, and the king is the queen's, by bone and by blood, until the last breath of the last wolf." The howl shook the candles. Serwyn swayed on her feet. The bond was awake now. It pulsed against her sternum like a second heart, and she could feel through it, faintly, terribly, the wall on the other side of the thread. The wall Corvan had built around himself, brick by brick, year by year. The wall he had spent 3 years reinforcing precisely because this moment was always going to come. He had felt the bond stir too. She knew it. And he was already, even now, pushing it back down. The ceremony ended. The wolves dispersed. The courtiers withdrew. The matriarch bowed and was gone. And Serwyn stood alone on the dais beside her husband, the crown heavy on her head, the blood drying on her wrist, the child no one knew about turning over inside her, slow and unaware. "My lord," she said. It was the first time she had spoken to him in 9 days. He did not turn. "It is late. There is something I must tell you. In the morning." "It cannot wait until the morning." A long silence. Then he turned. The pale gray of his eyes caught the candlelight and gave nothing back. "Speak then." She had practiced the words. She had practiced them so carefully. But standing in front of him, with the bond newly awake and pulsing against her ribs, with his cold gaze flattening her like a pressed flower, she could not find the rehearsed version. So she said the bare thing. "I am with child." The candles guttered. She watched his face. She watched it for the cracking she had hoped for. She watched it for the surprise, the tenderness, the something, anything. She watched it become stone. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, in a voice she had never heard before, a voice without temperature, "How long?" 2 months, she said. 17 days. "You are certain?" "Yes." He turned away from her. He turned away from her, and he walked down the dais steps, and he walked the length of the cathedral without speaking, his black cloaked back receding into the shadow of the eastern arch, and at the doorway he stopped and he did not look back. And he said, loud enough for her to hear across the empty cathedral, "Do not come to my chambers tonight." Then he was gone. She stood on the dais alone. The crown was very heavy on her head. The candles were burning low. The bond inside her chest was crying out against the wall he had thrown back up. And through the wall, faintly, terribly, she could feel something she had not expected to feel. She could feel that he was afraid. The Alpha King of the Iron Wastes, who had defeated 40 men in the Battle of the Ash River when he was 20, who had led the wolf armies into the southern kingdoms and returned with 7 crowns piled in his saddle, was afraid. Of her. Of the child. Of the thing that had stirred in the bond when their blood had mingled in the chalice. Serwyn lifted her hands to the crown of bone and silver. She lifted it from her head. She set it down on the altar where it had waited for her 3 years ago, and she walked down the dais steps, and she walked the length of the cathedral, and she walked through the eastern arch, and she did not weep. She walked through the silent corridors of the palace alone, the train of her ceremonial gown dragging behind her like a wound. The guards at every door dropped to one knee as she passed, and did not lift their eyes. She reached her chamber. She closed the door. She crossed to the door that connected her chamber to his, and she pressed her forehead against the wood, and she listened. He was inside. She could hear him pacing. The same pacing she had heard 1,000 nights for 3 years, but tonight the pacing was different. Tonight it was not the slow, careful tread of a man walking off a duty. Tonight it was the broken rhythm of a man whose hands were shaking. She pressed her palm flat against the wood. "What are you so afraid of?" she whispered. The pacing stopped. For a long, long moment she thought he had heard her. Through the wood, through the bond, through whatever had been opened tonight when their blood had mixed for the 3rd time. She felt him standing on the other side of the door. She felt his hand, somehow, hovering an inch from hers on the other side of the wood. She felt the wall between them go thinner than it had ever been. And then, very deliberately, he stepped away. She heard the soft sound of his boots on the stone, retreating. She heard the further door of his chamber open. She heard the corridor guards drop to a knee outside. She heard him give an order in a voice too low to carry. She heard him leave the palace. Serwyn stood with her palm pressed to the wood for a long time after he was gone. The bond inside her chest had quieted. It was not at peace. It had simply gone still, the way an animal goes still when the thing hunting it has come into the room. She lowered her hand. She crossed to her writing desk. She opened the small locked drawer where she kept the things that mattered. The letter from her mother that had arrived after her mother was already gone. The pressed sprig of mountain heather from the last meadow she had seen as a free child. The silver knife the matriarch had given her on her 16th birthday, with the words for "Whatever the world asks of you" engraved on the blade. She took the silver knife. She did not know yet what she was going to do with it. She did not know yet that, 2 corridors away, in a private war room she had never been allowed to enter, Corvan Ashvale had bowed his forehead against a cold stone wall and was speaking, in a voice barely above a breath, the name of a man 200 miles away who had been waiting 9 years for this night. She did not know yet that on the desk behind him lay a sealed letter, finished a year ago and never sent, that he had taken from a locked drawer the moment she said the words, "I am with child," and that he was holding it now in one shaking hand. The letter contained 4 words: "Forgive me, my love." Serwyn did not sleep that night, and she did not sleep the night after, and on the 3rd night she packed a small bag and walked out of the palace through the kitchen gardens. It was easier than she had imagined it would be. The guards did not stop her because the guards had never been told to stop her. She was the queen. She was also, by Corvin's careful arrangement, a thing without consequence. No order had ever been given for her safekeeping, because no one had ever imagined she would have somewhere to go. She had somewhere to go. The convent of the silver-bound nuns lay 4 days' ride to the south, in the foothills of the Drowned Mountains, in a valley so narrow and so forgotten that the maps of the kingdom did not name it. She had been raised there for 11 years. The Mother Superior, Vitharis, had wept the day the council came to take her. Vitharis had pressed a small wooden token into her palm as she was led to the carriage, a token carved into the shape of a wren, and had whispered, "If the world breaks you, child, you remember the way home." Serwyn had remembered. She did not take a horse from the royal stables, because a missing horse would be noticed within hours. She walked through the kitchen gardens and through the orchard and through the old hunting park, and at the eastern gate of the park, she found the gap in the stone wall that the gamekeepers used and had not mended in 40 years, and she squeezed through it with her bag pressed to her chest. She walked through the night. By dawn she was 12 miles from the palace, and she paid a farmer in silver coin to take her south on his cart for 2 days, hidden under a tarpaulin among the turnips. The farmer did not ask her name. He asked her once if she was running from a husband, and when she did not answer, he nodded as if he had expected as much, and gave her a heel of black bread. On the morning of the 5th day, she walked into the valley of the silver-bound nuns. Vitharis met her at the gate. The Mother Superior was older than Serwyn remembered. Her face was the face of a woman who had spent her life looking into very long distances. She did not speak when she saw Serwyn. She opened her arms and Serwyn walked into them, and for the first time since the cathedral, she allowed herself to weep. "He knows," she whispered into Vitharis's shoulder. "He knows," she whispered into Vitharis's shoulder. "He knows about the child, and he sent me away without a word, and I think he is going to do something terrible." Vitharis stroked her hair. "Then we hide you, child. We hide you until we know what he means to do." The convent was not a convent in the ordinary sense. It was a fortress disguised as a chapel, a network of stone cells built into the side of a mountain. The silver-bound nuns were not nuns. They were the last surviving order of an ancient sisterhood that had once served the Wolf Queens before the Wolf Queens were forgotten, and they remembered things the rest of the world had been carefully made to forget. Vitharis took Serwyn to the cell that had been hers as a child. The same narrow bed. The same small window looking out at the same crooked pine. The same shelf where she had kept her 3 childhood books. "You will stay here," Vitharis said, "and you will live under the name Wren, the name we used to call you between ourselves when you were a child here. The kingdom will be searching for Serwyn. The kingdom will not be searching for a girl named after a small brown bird. You will work in the herb garden in the mornings. You will help Sister Anael with the goats in the afternoons. You will not speak of the king. You will not speak of the bond. And when the child comes, we will keep it safe." Serwyn sank onto the narrow bed. "What if he sends men to find me?" "He will," Vitharis said quietly. "Sooner or later, he will. But this valley has hidden women from kings before. We have time." She slept that night without dreaming. It was the first night without dreaming since the cathedral. The weeks that followed were the gentlest of her life. The herb garden in the morning light, the goats in the afternoon, butting their hard heads against her thigh and demanding the salt she carried in her apron pocket. The bread she helped Sister Anael bake on the long stone slab in the kitchen. The library, in the evenings, where Vitharis began to teach her again. Only the lessons now were different. The lessons now were about her own bloodline. The bloodline the council had used to legitimize Corvin and had then forbidden anyone to study. "Your line is older than his," Vitharis told her one evening, by the light of a single tallow candle. "Your line is older than the council. Your line goes back to the first Wolf Queens. And the first Wolf Queens were not what the council has told you they were." "What were they?" Serwyn asked. Vitharis looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Not yet. Not until the child quickens." The child quickened in the 7th week of her hiding, on a morning when Serwyn was on her knees in the herb garden pulling chickweed from between the rows of mint. She felt it the way one feels a small fish turning in a deep pool. She sat back on her heels with her hands pressed to her belly, and she laughed out loud, the first real laugh of her life. That night, Vitharis came to her cell. Tonight, she said, we begin. She brought a basin of water and a single white candle and a small clay bowl of something that smelled of pine resin and old smoke. She had Serwyn lie down on the narrow bed. She placed her palms on Serwyn's belly. She closed her eyes. For a long time she did not speak. When she opened her eyes again, her face was the color of old parchment. "What?" Serwyn whispered. "What is it?" "The child," Vitharis said carefully, "is not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "A wolf. A pup of the king's line. A small, ordinary wolf-blooded heir." "And what is it instead?" Vitharis sat down on the edge of the bed. She took Serwyn's hand. She held it the way one holds the hand of a person about to be told something very large. "Serwyn," she said, "what did you feel in the cathedral, when your blood mingled with his in the chalice? What did the bond feel like when it woke?" "It felt," Serwyn said slowly, "like something on the other end of the thread that he had been hiding from me for 3 years." "And what was the something?" "I don't know. I felt only that he was afraid." Vitharis nodded slowly. "Yes. He would be." "Why would he be afraid?" The Mother Superior looked at the candle for a long moment before she answered. "Because, child, I do not believe your husband is what the kingdom believes he is. And I do not believe the child you carry is a wolf at all." Serwyn's heart began to beat very fast. "Then what is it?" Vitharis opened her mouth to answer. The convent bell began to ring. Not the noon bell. Not the evening bell. The other bell. The one that hung in the highest tower. The one that had rung only twice in Serwyn's lifetime. The bell that meant riders were approaching the valley. Vitharis was on her feet before the third peal. "Stay here," she said. "Do not open the door. Do not light a candle. Do not make a sound." She was gone before Serwyn could ask anything more. Serwyn sat in the dark. She heard faintly the sound of hooves on stone. She heard the gate of the outer wall being opened. She heard voices, men's voices, and Vitharis's voice answering, low and steady. She heard, after a long time, the sound of boots in the corridor. The boots stopped outside her door. She held her breath. The boots moved on. Vitharis came back to her cell as the moon was rising. The Mother Superior's face was gray. "They were the king's men," she said. "They are still searching for me?" "No, child. They were not searching for you. They were searching for the child. The child has not even been born." They knew the child existed. They knew approximately when it had been conceived. They had a list of every place a woman of your description might have gone, and we were on the list, and they came to confirm or deny. Vitharis sat down heavily on the bed. "I denied. They believed me, I think. But they will be back, and they will not be alone." "Why?" Serwyn whispered. "Why does he want the child so badly that he would send men hunting it before it is even born? He does not want the child, Serwyn." "Then why?" "He wants the child gone." The cell tilted around her. "No," she said. "No, you are wrong. You have to be wrong. He would not. He is cold, but he would not." "Serwyn." Vitharis took her face in both hands. "Listen to me. The men who came tonight were not the king's ordinary guards. They were a unit called the Quiet Hands. The Quiet Hands do one thing only. They do not arrest. They do not capture. They do not bring prisoners back. The Quiet Hands are sent when a problem must be ended without witnesses." "He sent them," Serwyn breathed. "He sent them. For me. For the child you carry. And for you, because you carry it." Serwyn sat with her hands flat on her belly. The child, for the second time, turned over inside her, slow and content. She could feel its small, contented turning, and she could feel, faintly through the bond she had thought was sealed shut, the answering pulse of something on the other end of the thread. The wall around Corrivan Ashvale had cracked. He was somewhere in the night, somewhere awake, and he was thinking about her. She could feel his fear and his grief, and a third thing she could not name. A third thing that felt almost like longing, almost like a man weeping in a locked room. She did not understand any of it. "Vitharis," she said, "what is the child?" The Mother Superior was silent for a long time. Then she said, "I will tell you. I will tell you tonight. But first you must know that what I am about to tell you was buried by the council 200 years ago, and the men who buried it silenced every woman who knew it, and the only reason I know it now is because my own mother whispered it to me on the night she passed." She drew a long breath. "Your husband is not the last of the Ashvale line. I know that. He has a brother. The council exiled the brother before I was born. The council did not exile the brother." Vitharis's voice was very quiet. "The council took the brother. And the brother your husband had, the brother whose name is forbidden to speak, was not Corvin's younger brother. He was Corvin's older brother. He was the rightful king. And he was not—" The convent bell began to ring again. The other bell. The high bell. Riders approaching. But this time, more than one. This time, many. Vitharis was on her feet, her face draining of all color. "They came back," she breathed. "They came back too quickly. Someone betrayed us." The first arrow shattered the cell window before Serwyn could draw breath to cry out. The arrow buried itself in the wall an inch from Serwyn's ear. The tip glistened with a black resin she recognized at once, because the silver-bound nuns had taught her to recognize it as a child. Wolfsbane reduced and thickened with the sap of the death vine. Vitharis had her by the wrist before the second arrow came. "The chapel," the Mother Superior said. "Now! Run!" Serwyn ran. She ran in her sleep shift and her bare feet, her bag forgotten on the bed, the silver knife from her writing desk pressed against her ribs where she had hidden it inside the binding of her chemise. Vitharis was ahead of her, moving with a speed that no woman of her age should have possessed, her white robes flying behind her like the wings of a great bird. They went through the corridor and down the stone stairs and across the cloister yard, and as they ran, Serwyn saw, through the columns, the shapes of the riders pouring through the breached outer gate. There were at least 20 of them. They wore no colors. They carried no banners. They moved in the absolute coordinated silence of men who had been trained together for many years to do one thing. The quiet hands. Vitharis pulled her into the chapel and barred the door behind them. The chapel was small and very old, its single stained glass window depicting a woman with a wolf curled at her feet. Sister Anael was already there. So were 6 other sisters. They were arming themselves. Serwyn realized with a shock that took her breath. From a chest that had been hidden beneath the altar. Short blades, silver-edged, gleaming. The silver-bound nuns, it turned out, had not been called silver-bound for the color of their habits. "Sisters," Vitharis said, "it is the quiet hands. They have come for the child." Sister Anael, who had taught Serwyn how to milk a goat, drew a curved silver blade from the chest and tested its weight in her palm. "Then they will not leave this valley unanswered. Anael, no, you cannot." "Mother." Anael did not look up from the blade. "We swore an oath to a bloodline older than this kingdom. We have waited 200 years for that oath to be called. It has been called tonight." Vitharis closed her eyes. She nodded. "Serwyn," she said, "you will go through the chapel undercroft. There is a door behind the altar. It opens into a passage that goes through the mountain and comes out in the next valley. There is a horse waiting at the far end. You will take the horse, and you will ride east to the river, and you will follow the river south to the sea. And at the sea you will find a fishing village called Lentharn, and in the fishing village you will find a man named Bray, who keeps a one-eyed dog. You will say to him, 'The wren has come home,' and he will know what to do." "I cannot leave you," Serwyn said. "You can. You will." "Vitharis." "Child." The Mother Superior took her face in her hands one last time. You are the last living daughter of a line that the council tried to extinguish 200 years ago and did not entirely succeed in extinguishing. The thing you carry inside you is the reason we kept that line alive. If you fall tonight, 200 years of women fall with you. Do you understand me? No, Serwyn whispered. No, I do not understand any of this. You will. Go. The chapel door shuddered under a heavy blow. Aniel and the other sisters took up positions facing it, their silver blades catching the candlelight. The door shuddered again. A third blow split the wood. Vitharis pushed Serwyn toward the altar. Go, child. Go now. The thing in your belly is worth more than every life in this chapel, and we know it and we chose it. Go. Serwyn went. She crawled behind the altar, where Vitharis showed her the iron ring set into the floor, and she pulled the ring, and a stone slab the size of a coffin lid lifted on hinges she had not known were there. A flight of narrow steps spiraled down into the dark. Vitharis pressed the clay bowl from the night before into her hand. Burn this if they catch your scent. It will hide you for one night, no more. Then Vitharis closed the slab over her head, and Serwyn was in the dark. She could hear, very faintly through the stone, the chapel door breaking. She could hear, very faintly, the first cry. She did not let herself think about it. She felt for the wall of the passage with her free hand, and she began to walk. The silver knife in one fist and the clay bowl in the other, the child in her belly turning and turning, oblivious, while the world burned above its head. The passage was longer than she had imagined a mountain could be. She walked for what felt like hours. The dark was so complete that she lost track of whether her eyes were open or closed. Twice she stumbled. Once she fell, hard, on her hip, and lay for a long time afraid she had hurt the child, and felt the child's small turning, and wept with relief, and got up, and walked on. The bond pulsed inside her chest as she walked. The wall on the other side of it was thinner than it had ever been. She could feel Corvin through the bond now. She could feel his fear, and his grief. And the third thing she still could not name. And she could feel, beneath all of it, his location. He was riding hard from the west. He was riding toward her. Why, she thought, why would he ride toward me when he sent the men who were hunting me? Unless he had not sent them. Unless the men who were hunting her had been sent by someone else. The thought stopped her in the middle of the passage. She stood in the dark with her hand pressed to the cold stone of the wall, and she made herself think the thought all the way through. The quiet hands had been described to her as the king's unit, but she had only Vitharis's word for it. The quiet hands might belong to the king, or they might belong to whoever had been running the king from behind the throne for 3 years, the council, the matriarch, the old bloodlines who had used Serwyn's bloodline to legitimize a man and were now afraid of what the bloodlines were producing together. Corvin had not sent the riders to her cell. Corvin was riding to stop them. Corvin, for 3 years, had been keeping her at arm's length, not because he despised her, but because he had known this was coming. He had known that the moment a child was conceived between his bloodline and hers, every old enemy he had ever made would crawl out of the ground to reach for that child before it drew breath. He had kept her unloved because love would have made her a target. He had kept her alone in her chamber on 1,000 nights because his enemies had been waiting, every one of those nights, for him to give them a reason. The wall around him had not been cruelty. The wall had been a shield. She started running. She did not know how long she ran in the dark. She only knew that the bond was crying out now, that what she felt on the other end of the thread was a man riding through the night toward the woman he loved and had never been allowed to tell. The passage ended in a rough wooden door. She shoved it open and fell forward into starlight. She was in a small clearing on the far side of the mountain. The convent was on the other side of the rock, hidden from view, but she could see the smoke rising over the ridge, a thin gray column against the moon, and she knew without being told what was burning. A horse was tethered to a pine, a gray gelding, saddled, waiting. She did not pause to mourn. She climbed onto the horse and she turned its head east, and she kicked it into a gallop, and she rode. She rode through what remained of the night. The bond pulsed beneath her sternum like a beacon. She was riding away from Corvin, she realized. She was riding east, and Corvin was riding from the west, and the convent burning behind her was the place where they had been about to meet. She did not turn back. Vitharis had told her to ride east, and Vitharis had bought her this ride with the lives of 7 women, and Serwyn would not waste the gift Vitharis had given her by turning around to chase a man whose face she still could not read. The sun came up. She rode on. By midday the gelding was lathered and stumbling. She slowed it to a walk, watered it at a stream, and ate the heel of dried bread she found in the saddlebag. There was a bundle in the saddlebag too. A cloak of common wool, a cap, a pair of boots in roughly her size, a small purse of silver coin, a folded paper. She unfolded the paper. Vitharis's handwriting, hurried. If you are reading this, I am gone. I am sorry, child. I had hoped to tell you in my own voice. The thing you carry is called a sun gold. It has not been born to your line in 200 years. Your husband's older brother was the last one. The council took him because what he was could not be ruled, only followed. Your husband has spent his whole life pretending to be a wolf so that the council would let him live. He is not a wolf. He is a sun gold's brother, which is its own thing. And he has loved you from the first hour he saw you, and he has never been allowed to say it. Trust the bond. Ride to Bray. Forgive your husband. He has been very alone. Serwyn sat on the bank of the stream and read the letter 4 times. Then she folded it, and she put it inside her chemise next to the silver knife, and she got back on the gelding, and she rode east. She did not weep. She did not have the time. By the 2nd sunset she reached the river. She followed it south. By the 4th sunset she smelled salt on the wind, and by the morning of the 5th day, she came down out of the dunes into a fishing village of 9 houses and a stone jetty. And she asked the first old woman she saw whether there was a man called Bray who kept a one-eyed dog. The old woman looked her up and down, looked at the gelding, which was barely standing, looked at her muddied cloak and her hollowed eyes and the curve of her belly under the wool. "You'll be the wren," the old woman said. "Yes." "Come along then, he's been expecting you for 200 years. Bray was a man of perhaps 60, with a gentle face, and hands that had worked rope his whole life. His one-eyed dog was an enormous gray hound that came to Serwyn and pressed its forehead against her belly and made a small whining sound. Bray watched the dog do it, and then he looked at Serwyn, and his face went very still. "It is a sun gold then," he said. "That is what Vitharis wrote. Vitharis is gone." "Yes." He bowed his head for a moment. Then he lifted it. "Come inside, child. We have very little time. The men hunting you will reach this coast within the week, and your husband will reach it perhaps a day before them. We need to decide which of them you mean to meet first." Serwyn sat down at his rough wooden table. The dog laid its head in her lap. The child in her belly turned over inside her, content and unaware. She was so tired. "I want to meet my husband," she said. "I want to meet him before they do." Bray looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, and he went to the door of his cottage and he whistled a long, low note into the wind, and from somewhere on the dunes, a horn answered. And Serwyn understood, with a slow, cold clarity, that the fishing village of Lentharn was not a fishing village at all. It was a gathering. It had been waiting for her for 200 years. And the conflict that her husband had spent 3 years trying to prevent by being cold to her was about to begin anyway, because the child inside her had decided in its own small way that it was time. The cottage of Bray the rope-maker became, over the course of the following day, the strangest gathering room Serwyn had ever stood inside. She had imagined, when Bray blew the horn into the wind, that armed people would come pouring out of the dunes at once. They did not. They came slowly. They came one by one, and two by two, and never more than 3 at a time, and they came across the next 2 days from every direction the compass offered. A blacksmith from a village 6 miles inland. A widow with gray hair and a sword strapped under her market basket. 3 brothers off a fishing boat that had not been a fishing boat in a long time. A woman who introduced herself as the lighthouse keeper. By the second sunset there were 40 of them in the cottage and the yard, and Bray had stopped bothering to introduce them, and Serwyn had stopped trying to count. They did not bow to her. They did not kneel. They watched her. They watched her the way people watch a candle they have been guarding for a very long time, afraid of the slightest draught, afraid to look away. The lighthouse keeper, whose name was Maris, took it upon herself to attend to Serwyn. She prepared a bath of seawater and herbs in a wooden tub behind a hung sheet. She brought clean clothes that fit, which meant someone had been measuring Serwyn by sight and stitching for her in advance. She brought food at intervals that ignored the hour, and Serwyn ate without arguing because she had learned in 3 years of palace life that refusing care offered without warmth was its own kind of vanity. On the 3rd morning, Bray came to her with a folded square of black cloth. "He is 2 days' ride west of here," Bray said. "His outriders have been sighted on the high road. He is alone, except for one man, and he is riding hard enough that the one man cannot keep up." "Corvin." "Yes. He is alone." She heard her own voice, and recognized that she was only half believing it. "The Alpha King of the Iron Wastes is riding to a coastal village with one companion. He is not bringing an escort. He is not bringing an escort because he does not want to be seen by anyone who could carry word back to the council. He is also not bringing one because he believes, correctly, that we have one. He knows about you. He knows about us. He has known about us his whole life. He is the only man in the kingdom of his generation who knows. His brother told him, before his brother was taken." Serwyn sat down on the edge of Bray's narrow cot. She placed one hand on her belly. The child turned over, calm. "Tell me about his brother," she said. "His brother's name was Errol," he said. "The council does not allow that name to be spoken." Errol was 12 years older than Corvin. He was 23 when their father passed, and the throne fell to him, and he was a Sungold. The first the Ashvale line had produced in 7 generations. The council did not understand at first what he was, because the council had spent 200 years carefully forgetting what a Sungold was. By the time they understood, Errol was 25, and the kingdom loved him, and the wolves of the eastern provinces had begun to come down from their mountains for the first time in a century to see him. Sungolds do that. They draw the old wolves the way a fire draws cold hands. "What is a Sungold?" Bray looked at her for a long moment. "A Sungold," he said, "is what wolves were before they were wolves. The first form. The form the bloodlines lost when the council made them lose it. A Sungold can shift, but a Sungold does not shift into a wolf. A Sungold shifts into a creature for which the kingdom has no word any longer, because the council has erased the word from every book it could reach. The closest word in any living language is in the speech of the Tereth herders of the southern Grass Sea, and their word for it means the bright dog that is not a dog." "My child," Serwyn said slowly, "is one of these. Your child is one of these, yes. And Corvin is not. Corvin is not. Corvin is a wolf. Corvin is a very fine wolf, and a very fine king. But he is a wolf. His brother was the Sungold. The council let Corvin live, after they took Errol, because they believed Corvin was safe, the wolf brother of a creature they had now successfully erased. He carries the wolf, and he carries the bond to the Sungold line through his brother, and that bond is what allows him to recognize a Sungold when one is conceived. He felt your child the night your child was conceived. He has felt it every night since. Serwyn pressed both hands flat over the curve of her belly. He has felt the child for 2 months, she whispered. Yes. He has known, for 2 months, that I was carrying the thing the council took his brother to prevent. Yes. And he said nothing. He said nothing because he was afraid that if you knew, you would not be able to hide the knowing. He said nothing because the council watches your face, child. They have watched your face every day for 3 years. He could not afford for them to read in your eyes what was growing in your belly, so he made certain there was nothing in your eyes for them to read. He made certain you hated him. He made certain you believed he hated you. Because a hated wife sits at a banquet table with a face the council does not bother to study, and a beloved wife sits at a banquet table with a face the council studies very closely indeed. Serwyn put her face in her hands. She was not weeping. She had passed through weeping the night she walked out of the kitchen gardens. She was simply trying to hold in her 2 hands a marriage she had thought was one shape and had just discovered was a different shape entirely. He had not been cold to her. He had been crouched over her like a man crouching over a candle in a wind, his whole body bent to keep something small from being blown out. And she had spent 3 years cursing him for the shadow he cast. Bray, she said into her palms. Yes, child. He came to my chamber 11 times in 3 years. Bray was quiet for a moment. He came 11 times because he loved you and was permitted nothing else, he said carefully. And on the 11th time, the bond between you reached the point where his control was no longer enough to keep it asleep, and a child was conceived. He has been writing letters of confession to my house since the night he understood. We have a stack of them in the chest by the hearth. He has not sent them. He has only written them. He is a man who writes letters to people he believes he is not allowed to speak to. Show me, Serwyn said. She lifted her face from her hands. Show me the letters. Bray hesitated. He did not send them, child. He did not intend for you to read them. Show me. The old man went to the chest by the hearth. He lifted the lid. He removed a stack of papers, perhaps 30 or 40, each folded once and sealed with a plain wax disc bearing no crest. He set the stack on the table in front of her. She picked up the topmost letter and broke the seal. The handwriting was the same handwriting she had seen on the orders he signed in council, the same precise, careful hand, but the words on this paper were not careful and were not precise. They were the words of a man writing in the dark to no one, the words of a man who had been holding his breath for a very long time and had finally begun, in solitude and in secret, to exhale. I watched her at supper tonight. She did not eat. I did not eat either. She believes I do not look at her. She has stopped looking at me, which is what I asked the world for, and which is breaking me. She picked up the next. The child quickened today. I felt it through the bond at the 3rd hour past noon. I had to ask the envoys to leave the room. The child is a Sungold. I knew it would be. I do not know how I will keep her safe. The next. She knocked on the door tonight. She pressed her hand against the wood. I felt her on the other side. I almost broke. If you are ever to read these letters, my love, you will know that I came within 1 inch of breaking that door down and telling you everything. And the only reason I did not is that the ones watching the corridor would have reached you before sunrise. The next. She has gone. She has gone tonight. And I am glad. And I am ruined. Vitharis has her. The quiet hands will move within the week. Forgive me, brother. I have failed her in every way a man can fail a woman, and the only thing I have left to offer her is the chance to outrun the ones I cannot stop from hunting her. Serwyn set the letters down. She placed both palms flat on the table. She looked at Bray, and she said, Bring me a horse. Child, bring me a horse. I am riding to him. Child, he is riding to you. He will be here within the day. You do not need to ride, you only need to wait. I have waited 3 years. I have waited 3 years on the wrong side of a wall I did not understand. I am not going to wait another 6 hours. She stood up. The one-eyed dog rose with her. Bring me a horse, Bray. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he bowed his head. The first time he had bowed it. And he said, Yes, my queen. It took an hour to ready the horse. Maris the lighthouse keeper insisted on a heavy cloak, and a second pair of boots, and a wineskin and a satchel of small loaves. The blacksmith brought a blade he had made himself, a short thing meant for the saddle, balanced for a hand the size of hers. He pressed it into her palm without speaking. The widow with the gray hair came forward with a small leather pouch that smelled of pine resin, the same compound Vitharis had pressed into her hand in the chapel. Burn it if you are followed, the widow said. It hides a scent for one night. Sister Vitharis taught me how to make it 40 years ago. It was the last thing she taught me. You knew her. I was her sister-in-arms before she went to the convent. I made my choice. She made hers. I am sorry I am here. And she is not. Serwyn took the pouch. She mounted the horse. The whole strange small gathering of 40 assembled in Bray's yard to watch her go. They did not cheer. They did not call after her. They stood in the late afternoon light with the sea wind in their faces and watched her ride west out of the village, and their watching had the weight of a thing that had been waiting 200 years to begin. The one-eyed dog ran beside the horse for the first mile. Then it stopped and turned and went back. It had been told, by some signal she had not seen, that she did not need its company on this ride. She rode west into a low red sun. The bond was alight beneath her sternum now. She did not have to guess at his direction. She rode along the line of it as if along a stretched rope, and the rope thrummed in her chest with each hoofbeat, and the sun went down, and the moon came up, and at the 3rd hour after midnight, on a ridge above a dry stream bed, she came over the rise and saw a single small fire burning below her. A man sat beside the fire. A black horse was tethered to a thorn tree behind him. The man's head was bowed. He was not eating. He was not sleeping. He was holding something in both hands, turning it over and over, the way a person turns over a thing he has loved for a long time and cannot afford to look at directly. She slid down from her saddle. She left the horse on the ridge. She walked down through the loose stones of the stream bed in her borrowed boots, and the man at the fire did not lift his head, because the bond had told him she was coming an hour ago, and he had been sitting there, turning the thing in his hands, waiting to be ready. He was not ready. She stopped on the far side of the fire. He still did not look up. Corvin, she said. He drew in a breath that shook all the way down. My lady. No, she said. Not that. Not any more. He lifted his head. His face in the firelight was the face of a man she had never met. The cold mask was gone. What was underneath had been underneath the whole time, and what was underneath was a man whose eyes had been carrying a grief she had spent her marriage believing was indifference. Serwyn, he said. The first time he had ever spoken her name. She walked around the fire. She knelt down in the dust in front of him. She took the thing he was holding from his hands. It was a small wooden token. A wren. She knew this token. She had carried its twin in a locked drawer for 11 years, since Vitharis had pressed it into her palm on the day the council took her. She had not known that there was a second one. Where did you get this? She whispered. My brother carved them. He carved a pair. He gave one to a girl he had never met, on the day she was born, and asked Vitharis to keep it for her until she was old enough to need it. He kept the other one for me. He told me, before he was taken, that the girl would find me one day, and when she did, I was to give her the second wren, and ask her forgiveness, and tell her that I had loved her since before she had a name. He closed his eyes. His shoulders shook once. I have failed you, he said. I have failed you in every way a man can fail a woman, and I have spent 3 years building the cage I kept you in, and tonight I am going to ask you to forgive me even though I do not deserve to be forgiven, because the council is going to be on this coast within the week, and I cannot face them and ask your forgiveness at the same time, so I am asking now. She set the wren down on the stone between them. She placed both her hands on either side of his face. He was trembling under her palms. The Alpha King of the Iron Wastes, who did not tremble, was trembling. I read your letters, she said. His eyes opened. All of them? All of them. He started to speak. She put her thumb against his mouth. Listen to me, she said. I am very angry with you. I am going to be very angry with you for a long time. You took 3 years from us that we are not going to get back, and you let me believe a story about myself that nearly broke me, and I am not going to pretend tonight that those things did not happen. I know. But I am here. I rode through the night to find you. I am here because the bond between us has been awake for 2 months, and you have been standing on the other side of it weeping, and I have been standing on my side of it furious, and we have wasted enough time. Serwyn, the child, she said, is yours. Whatever it is yours, and it is mine, and it is going to be born, and we are going to keep it safe together, because I am done being kept safe without my consent, and you are done keeping yourself safe by destroying what you love. Is that understood? He nodded once. He could not speak. She leaned her forehead against his. Tell me you love me, she said. Say it once. You have written it 40 times to no one. Say it once to me. I have loved you, he said, since the night of my brother's passing, when Vitharis came to me in secret and told me that there was a girl child in a convent who had been promised to my line, and showed me a sketch of her face, drawn by a sister who had seen her sleeping. I have loved you since I was 14 years old. I have loved you longer than I have known your name. I have loved you every day of our marriage, and I have hated every day of our marriage, and I have hated myself most of all. And I am sorry, Serwyn. I am so sorry. The child turned over in her belly. Both of them felt it. She saw his eyes widen in the same instant her hand moved to her side, and a small bright pulse of warmth went through the bond between them, a pulse that did not come from her and did not come from him. A pulse that came from the third small dreaming creature whose existence had set this whole long, terrible season in motion, a creature that, even unborn, was already reaching for both its parents at once. It was the first time in 3 years that any of them had been in the same circle of light. Corvin's hands came up at last and closed over hers, and he bowed his forehead against her belly, and Serwyn, kneeling in the dust of the dry stream bed with the fire burning at their side, finally allowed herself to weep. They did not sleep that night, but they rested. She lay with her back against his side, and his arm across her belly, and the small fire burning down to coals in front of them, and the bond between them was so quiet, after 3 years of being held under, that she kept startling awake to make sure it was still there. Each time she startled, his arm tightened around her, and she heard his low voice in her ear telling her to rest. Toward dawn, she gave up the effort and turned in his arms to look at him. His face, in the gray light, was younger than it had been in 3 years of palace candles. The lines around his mouth had loosened. His eyes were red. Tell me everything, she said. From the beginning. Tell me what we are riding into. He told her about Errol, the brother who had been taken in a hunting accident that had not been an accident, the brother whose body the council had brought into the chapel of the palace and had not allowed Corvin to see. He told her about Kadrin, the captain of Errol's personal guard, the one who had hidden the Wren tokens, the one man in the kingdom Corvin trusted absolutely. Where is he now? Serwyn asked. He was riding behind me. I outran him on the second day. He is perhaps half a day behind us. He will reach the village by tonight. And the council? Corvin was quiet for a moment. The council has known, since the night of the cathedral, that you are pregnant. They have been preparing for the possibility for 3 years. The quiet hands at the convent were the first wave. There will be a second wave. The second wave will not be the quiet hands. It will be the Legion. They will sweep the coast from the drowned mountains to the sea cliffs to be certain of the child. How many? 6,000. She did not respond at once. 40 silver-bound in a fishing village. 6,000 legionaries moving down the coast. Then we cannot stand at the village, she said. No, we cannot. What can we do? He drew a breath. There is a place, he said, called the Stone Mouth. It is a sea cave, half a day's ride south of Lentharn. It is where the Sungold line was hidden, in the years of the burning. If we can reach it before the Legion reaches the coast, the Legion will sweep the village and find no one, and they will spend a month combing the cliffs and finding nothing. And in that month, the child will be born, and we will come out of the Stone Mouth on the other side of a thing the council has not seen in 200 years. And then? And then, he said, we take the kingdom back. Not from the throne, from underneath. Sungolds were never kings, Serwyn. Kings ruled. Sungolds were followed. The wolves of the eastern provinces will come down out of the mountains again. The bloodlines the council pruned will lift their heads. The council will discover that the throne they have been running for 200 years sits on a foundation that has finally remembered itself, and the foundation will move, and the throne will fall. She thought about this for a long time. How long, she said, until the child is old enough to be seen? Sungolds grow into themselves quickly. Errol was walking at 4 months, speaking at 7. He shifted for the first time at 11 months. By his second year he could call wolves across 100 miles. The council allowed him to live until he was 26, because they wanted him old enough that his passing would teach the kingdom a lesson the kingdom would not forget. Corvin was 14 the night his brother was taken. So the child will be ready in less than 2 years. Less than 2 years. Yes. And in those 2 years. In those 2 years, he said, we hide. We hide in the Stone Mouth until the Legion gives up. Then we move. Then we move again. We trust Bray's people. We trust Kadrin. We trust no one else. We become, for 2 years, a family of 3 crossing a country that is searching for us, and we tell the child every night that it is safe. Because the child must believe it is safe in order to grow into the thing it is meant to be. A frightened Sungold becomes a wolf. A loved Sungold becomes a Sungold. She lay back against him. Corvin. Yes. If we run for 2 years and the child grows into what it is meant to be, and the kingdom changes and the council falls, what happens to us? What do you mean? I mean, we have spent 3 years apart in the same building. We have a marriage that is 6 days old, by my count. The whole story you have told me is a story about the child. You have not told me yet whether there is a story about us inside the story, about the child. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, there is a story about us. There has always been a story about us. The story about us is the reason there is a story about the child. I have not told it to you because I have not yet earned the right to tell it. But it exists, Serwyn. It is the longest story I have. And if you will let me, I will spend the next 2 years and every year after that telling it to you, one piece at a time, until you believe it. She closed her eyes. She let his arm tighten around her. Yes, she said. They rode out at dawn. They rode east first, toward the village, because Corvin would not consider the question of the Stone Mouth without first speaking to Bray. Serwyn rode in front of him on his black horse, his arm around her waist. The country was empty in the cold blue early light. The sea wind reached them an hour before they saw the sea. They came over the last dune and saw Lentharn below them. Serwyn's breath stopped. The lighthouse was burning. Not the village. Only the lighthouse. The tall white tower at the end of the stone jetty was on fire. A black column of smoke rose straight up into the windless morning. There was no movement in the village itself. No figures in the lanes. No boats on the water. Corvin drew a sharp breath. "They moved faster than I thought," he said. "The first wave of the Legion is here." "How can they be here? You said a week." "Someone has been ahead of us this whole ride. Someone in Bray's village, perhaps. Someone who saw you arrive and sent word, and the council moved its riders forward to catch us before we could reach the stone mouth. They are in the village now." "They are in the village now." She looked at the lighthouse. She thought about Maris, who had drawn her bath. She thought about the widow with the gray hair who had pressed the pine resin pouch into her palm. She thought about the blacksmith who had made her the saddle blade. "Corvin, we cannot ride down there. We will be seen. We must turn south and ride for the stone mouth at once, alone. The 40 are gone, or they are scattered, or they are holding the line and we cannot help them. I am sorry. I am not riding past. Serwyn. I am not riding past while they are standing for us." He gripped her shoulders and turned her in the saddle to face him. "Listen to me," he said, very low and very fast. "You are carrying the sun gold. You are carrying the only sun gold that has been conceived in 200 years. There is no calculus in which 40 lives outweigh that child. Bray knows this. Maris knows this. Every one of them rode into this village knowing it. If you ride down into Lentharn now, you make their stand meaningless." She stared at him. She understood the arithmetic. She also understood that she had been a queen for 3 years, who had never once made a decision, because every decision had been made for her, by a husband who would not look at her, by a council that had kept her in a glass box, by a fate she had not chosen. And that if she rode south now, away from Lentharn, she would be making the right decision. But she would be making it because Corvin had told her to make it, and she would resent him for it. And the resentment would become a small new wall inside the bond, and the wall would grow. "Corvin," she said. "Yes. I am riding down, not to fight. I am not foolish. I am riding down to find any of them who are still standing, and I am bringing them with us to the stone mouth. They have waited 200 years. They are not going to be lost in the lanes of a fishing village while I run." He stared at her. For a long moment she thought he was going to refuse her. Then his face changed. It changed in a way she did not have a word for, and would not have a word for until much later, when she understood that what she was seeing was a man recognizing for the first time that he had married a queen. "Then we ride down together," he said. "Fast in, faster out. We take whoever can be taken. But Serwyn, hear me now. If I tell you to ride, you ride. Without arguing. You do not turn back from me. The bond will tell you whether I am still with you. If I am, I will find you at the stone mouth. If I am not, you will go on, and you will keep the child safe, and you will not look back. Do I have your word?" "You have my word." He nodded once. He turned the black horse's head down the dune. They rode into Lentharn at a hard gallop. The village was not empty. Serwyn saw that the moment they passed the first cottage. Figures in the lane. 2 men in the unmarked dark armor she had seen on the quiet hands, lying still beside the well. 3 of Bray's silver-bound, lying still nearer the smithy. The morning light was very clear and very thin, and made every detail too sharp. The clash had passed through here perhaps an hour ago. Serwyn could hear it, faintly, somewhere on the cliffs north of the village. Steel and shouting, a long way off. Corvin reined in the black horse hard at the center of the village, where Bray's cottage stood with its door hanging open on one hinge. He swung down. He lifted Serwyn down after him and set her on her feet behind the horse's bulk, where she could not be seen from the cliff path. "Stay," he said. He went into the cottage with his sword drawn. He came out a moment later, his face like stone, and he shook his head once. Bray? Serwyn whispered. Bray is not here. There has been a struggle inside. He was taken, perhaps. Or he ran. There is a trail going north toward the cliffs. The fighting we hear is them, I think. Some of the 40 made it to the cliff path with him. They are trying to draw the Legion away from the village, into the cliffs, to give us a clear road south. She understood. She understood that 40 people were spending themselves, at this moment, to clear a single road for her, and that the road would close behind her the moment she rode down it, and that she would never know which of them had survived. Corvin, she said. Yes. There is something in there, in the cottage, isn't there? He did not answer. She moved past him before he could stop her. She went into Bray's cottage. The one-eyed dog was lying on the floor by the hearth. Its great gray body was very still, and Serwyn knelt down beside it without thinking, and she put her hand on the dog's flank. And the dog was warm, and the dog's flank rose under her palm in a small, ragged breath. Corvin, she called. He is still with us. He came in. He bent over the dog. He looked at the wound in the dog's side, a long cut from a blade that had been swept low. He looked at Serwyn. He cannot ride, he said gently. He cannot walk. We cannot carry him fast enough. I can heal him. He paused. What? I can heal him. She had not known she was going to say it until she said it, and once she had said it, she understood that she had known the whole time. The thing inside her had known. She had been the slow one, refusing to listen, but the thing inside her had known. Corvin. The child is awake. The child knows what I am. Vitharis taught me, in the convent, that the bloodline carried a gift the council had buried with its name. I have never been allowed to use the gift, because to use it was to be discovered. I am not going to leave this dog in the doorway of a man who saved my life. She put both her hands flat on the dog's side. She closed her eyes. She did not know what she was doing. She only knew that the child in her belly turned over slowly, dreamily, and that something opened inside her chest that had been closed her whole life. A door behind a door behind a door. And that, on the other side of the innermost door, was a warmth she had felt only once before. In the cathedral, when her blood had mingled with Corvin's in the chalice, and the bond had stirred for the first time. The warmth flowed down her arms and out through her palms. The dog drew a long breath that did not rattle. Under her hands, the wound in the great gray flank knit itself closed. Not all the way. Not whole. But enough. The dog's head lifted. The single dark eye opened and found her face, and the dog made a small whining sound that was not pain, and Serwyn leaned down and pressed her forehead against the dog's forehead, and she said, "Get up. We are going." The dog got up. Corvin was staring at her. He was staring at her, the way a man stares at a sunrise he has been told for 40 years was a story. "Serwyn," he breathed. "Later," she said, "we go south." They went south at a hard gallop, the black horse alone now, the one-eyed dog running beside them on legs that should not have been carrying him. Serwyn rode in front of Corvin, his arm tight around her, the leather pouch of pine resin clenched in her fist in case it was needed, the small saddle blade strapped at her thigh. The sun climbed. The country south of Lentharn was a country of low salt flats and broken rock, the kind of country that did not hide a rider well, and they pushed the horse harder than the horse was meant to go. The dog kept pace at a long, easy lope that was not quite right. By mid-morning they reached the cliff line where the land fell away into the sea. The stone mouth, Corvin had told her, opened in the cliff face, from the seaside. There was a goat path down the cliff that the Silverbound had cut into the rock 2 centuries ago, hidden by an overhang from anyone watching the cliff top. And at the bottom of the path was a tide-cut shelf of stone, and at the back of the shelf was the cave entrance, which the tide closed off twice a day. They needed to reach the path within the hour because the tide was rising. They reached the path within the hour. They did not reach it alone. A rider came out of the rocks behind them. One rider on a lathered horse, his face dark with dust and with travel. Corvin reined in hard. His sword was halfway out of its sheath when he saw the rider's face. Then he sheathed it again, his shoulders dropping, and Serwyn heard him laugh, a short broken sound she had never heard from him. "Cadrin," he said. The rider drew up beside them. He was perhaps 50, with a hard, scarred face and eyes the color of wet slate. He looked at Serwyn for a long moment. Then he inclined his head, very slightly, the smallest possible bow, and he said, "My queen. You are Cadrin. I am Cadrin. My husband has told me about you. He has told you very little, I expect." "Enough." Cadrin's mouth twitched at one corner. "Then we will speak more later. There are perhaps 200 legionaries half an hour behind me. I outrode them, but only just. They will see this cliff line within the hour. We must be off the top by then." The Stonemouth. The Stonemouth. They went down the goat path. It was a narrow cut in the rock. The horses balked. They had to be led one by Corvin and Cadrin, while Serwyn went ahead on foot with the dog. The path doubled back on itself 5 times. The sea opened beneath them, very blue, very cold, with white at its edges where it met the rock. The wind came up the cliff in sudden gusts that pulled at her cloak. She was halfway down when the bond inside her chest changed. It changed sharply. It changed because the child changed. The child had been calm all morning. The child had been calm since she had healed the dog. Now, on the cliff path, the child went still in a way that was not calm. The child went still the way a small animal goes still in a thicket when a larger animal comes near. Serwyn stopped on the path. "Corvin," she called. "Keep moving." "Corvin, the child." He came down the path to her in 3 long strides, dropping the rein of the black horse. He reached her. He put his hand on her belly. His face changed. "What is it?" he said. "What is it doing?" "It is hiding." "From what?" She looked up. Above them, on the cliff edge, a figure had appeared. Not a legionary. Not a quiet hand. A single figure in a long, pale robe, standing where the cliff path began, looking down at them with the calm, patient interest of a person who had found exactly what they had come looking for. A woman. Serwyn knew her at once, although she had only ever seen the face once, 3 years ago, at the cathedral, in the half-second before she had been told to lower her eyes. The matriarch. The woman who had crowned her 3 years ago. The woman who had stood at the altar and led her through the words of binding. Cadrin drew in a sharp breath, very quietly, on the path behind them. Corvin's hand on Serwyn's belly tightened. "She came herself?" he said, almost in wonder. "She did not send the legion. She came herself." "She has been the one running this," Serwyn whispered. "The whole time, not the council. Her." "Yes." The matriarch lifted one hand from her side. She did not call out. She did not speak. She only smiled, the small, thin smile of a teacher who has caught a clever student in a small expected lie, and she gestured with 2 fingers at the air to her left, and out of the rocks behind her there rose, in absolute silence, perhaps 30 figures in long, pale robes identical to her own. Not legionaries, not quiet hands. Something else. Something Serwyn did not have a word for, although the child inside her, very quietly, very cleverly did. The child knew what they were. The child had gone still because the child had recognized them. "Corvin," Serwyn breathed, her hand closing over his on her belly. "What are they?" His voice when he answered was the voice of a man who had been afraid of this exact question for his entire adult life. "They are what is left of the order that taught your sisters at the convent," he said. They are the silver-bound who took the other side of the long quarrel 200 years ago. They are the ones who took my brother. They are sun gold binders, Serwen. And they have been waiting 200 years for another sun gold to be born, so that they can finish what they started. And we have walked our child onto a cliff path with the sea on one side, and the cliff on the other, and them at the top, and I do not know how to get us out. The matriarch lowered her hand. The 30 pale figures began in silence to come down the cliff path. The pale figures came down the cliff path in absolute silence, and Serwyn understood, with a clarity that felt borrowed from the child inside her, that silence was their power. The silver-bound of the convent had been called silver-bound for the blades they carried. These women were called silver-bound for something else. The silver was inside them. The silver had been threaded through their throats 200 years ago, in a ceremony the council had erased from every book, and the silver was the reason a sun gold could not be born within a mile of them. A sun gold's gift was warmth. The silver in their throats was a cold the warmth could not pass through. The child knew them. The child was hiding from them. The child had stopped turning. Corvin, she said, I see them. The child has gone still. I know. What does the child going still mean? He did not answer for a moment. Then he said, low, it means the child is doing the only thing a sun gold can do when the silver-bound are close. It is dimming itself. It is making itself look, to them, like a wolf pup. That is how Errol came through the first 2 attempts on his light. The third time, they brought enough silver into the room to overwhelm him, and he could not dim himself fast enough. How long can the child do it? Not long. Minutes. She looked up at the matriarch. The matriarch had stopped on the path 20 feet above them, and the 30 pale figures had stopped behind her in a loose, silent column, and there was no haste in any of them, because there was nowhere on the cliff path for a pregnant woman to run. The matriarch spoke. Her voice was the voice that had crowned Serwyn 3 years ago, the same calm, musical voice, the voice of a woman reading a familiar text aloud. Daughter, she said, come up the path. Bring no one with you. The men are not the question tonight. Only you and what you carry. Come up the path, and we will end this kindly, and the rest of them will live. Kadrin on the path behind them said very quietly, she is not telling the truth. I know, Serwyn said. She did not raise her voice. The matriarch, 20 feet above her, heard her anyway, because the bond between them was older than the cathedral. Serwyn had not understood it until this moment. She had thought the bond was a thing only between her and Corvin. It was not. It was a thing between every silver-bound woman and every sun-gold-bearing woman who had ever stood within a mile of one another, and the matriarch, who had crowned her, had been bonded to her for 3 years, and Serwyn had never been told. You knew, Serwyn said. On the night you crowned me. You knew what I was. I knew what you might be. You hoped I was not. I hoped you were not. You crowned me anyway. I crowned you because the council demanded it. I gave you to him because the council demanded it. I told myself, every night for 3 years, that he would never go to you, because I had taken his measure on the day his brother was taken, and I had decided he was a man broken enough that he would never risk a child. I was wrong. The matriarch smiled the small, thin smile. I am not often wrong. It is a small mercy, after a long life, to be reminded that I am not infallible. You are going to take my child. Yes, you are going to take me. Yes. I am sorry, daughter. I have grown fond of you. But what you carry cannot be allowed to be born. We have spent 200 years building a kingdom that can stand without a sun gold at its center, and we will not let one woman undo that work. What was wrong with the kingdom that had a sun gold at its center? The matriarch considered her for a moment. The kingdom that had a sun gold at its center, the matriarch said finally, was a kingdom that did what the sun gold wanted. The Sun Gold did not rule. You have been told that. The Sun Gold was followed. But what the Sun Gold wanted, the kingdom did. Because the kingdom loved the Sun Gold, and a kingdom that loves a single creature is a kingdom that has put itself inside the chest of that creature. We watched what happened to a kingdom whose heart was outside its body. We watched a Sun Gold lost to a hunting accident and a kingdom go mad with grief. And we watched a province come undone because its Sun Gold was gone. And we decided that no kingdom should ever again be a body whose heart was a single creature in a single chest. So we threaded silver through our throats, and we drew the Sun Golds out of the bloodlines, and we built a council that would rule by treaty, and by ledger and by argument. And we made the kingdom safe from the kind of love that had once undone it. Love, when it is concentrated in a single creature, is the most dangerous thing in the world. We have spent 200 years protecting the kingdom from it. I will not let you bring it back. You are afraid of love, Serwyn said. I am cautious of it. You are afraid of it. The matriarch's smile thinned further. Come up the path, daughter. No. Come up the path, and the men live. No. Then they go first, and you watch, and then you come up the path. She lifted her hand again. The 30 pale figures behind her began, in silence, to draw long, thin blades from inside their robes. Kadrin, behind Serwyn on the path, drew his sword. Corvin, beside her, did not. He went very still in the way she had learned to recognize, the stillness of a man making a decision that was going to cost him everything. She felt the decision through the bond before he made it. She felt him gather himself. She felt him let go of every careful arrangement he had built across 3 years. She felt him decide to spend himself. Corvin, she said. No. Serwyn. No. Whatever you are about to do, no. Listen to me. He turned her in his arms on the narrow path, with the sea boiling below them and the silver bound coming down at them and the child hiding inside her belly. He took her face in both hands. I am going up the path. I am going to face her. I am not going to win. While I am holding the line, Kadrin is going to take you down to the shelf, and the dog is going down with you, and the cave is going to open, and you are going to go inside, and the cave is going to close behind you, and you are going to live. Do you understand? No. Serwyn. No. I am not running again. I have run from a husband I did not understand, and a convent I loved and a village I had only just met. I am not running from you. Not from you, Corvin. You are not running from me. You are running with our child, who is the only thing tonight that matters, and I am buying you the time to do it. And that is not running. That is the thing we agreed to. That is the calculus we agreed was the calculus. And I am holding you to it. Corvin. Serwyn, please. She looked at him. She looked at him. And through the bond she felt the whole long story he had not yet had time to tell her. The story about them. And she understood that he had decided to give her the ending of that story now. In advance. In case there was no later in which to tell her the rest. The ending of the story was that he would stand for her on a cliff path with the sea below. She did not accept the ending. No, she said, there is a third thing. There is no third thing? There is. Listen to me. She put her hands flat on his chest. She closed her eyes. She reached down inside herself for the gold she had used on the dog in Bray's cottage, the gold that had opened in her chest like a door behind a door behind a door, and she did not push it out through her palms this time, because the dog had been wounded and the gold had known what to do. This time she pulled it up. She pulled it up into her throat. She pulled it up into her mouth. She opened her eyes. She turned in his arms to face up the path at the matriarch. She spoke. She did not know what language she was speaking. She did not know if she was speaking a language at all. The sound that came out of her was the sound the dog had made when she pressed her forehead against the dog's forehead in the cottage, but bigger, slower, deeper. A sound that came up out of the floor of the sea. A sound that was the sound a Sungold's mother made when the silver bound came for her child. The sound was not a cry of grief. The sound was a summons. The wind went still on the cliff face. The seabirds went still on the rocks. The tide, which had been climbing the cliff foot, paused. And from very far away, from the eastern mountains 100 miles inland, from the high ranges where the old wolves had been waiting in caves the council had not been able to reach, an answering sound came. It was a howl. It was a single howl, and then it was many howls, and then it was a chorus. And the chorus did not come from one place but from a long line of places, the line of the eastern mountains, the line of all the bloodlines the council had pruned and could not entirely cut. The matriarch on the path froze. For the first time in 3 years, Serwyn saw fear move across her face, the kind that comes when a woman who has run a long, careful course for a long, careful time understands that the course has just changed shape. "What have you done?" the matriarch whispered. "I called them," Serwyn said. "That sound is not yours to make. That sound belongs to the Sungold. The Sungold is inside me. The Sungold made me make it." The chorus from the mountains rolled across the country toward them. It would take hours, Serwyn knew, for the wolves to actually arrive. But the sound traveled at the speed of sound, and the sound was here now, and the silver bound on the path could hear it as well as Serwyn could, and the silver bound understood what the sound meant. It meant that the wolves had heard a Sungold's mother, and the wolves were coming. The 30 pale figures on the path looked at the matriarch. Not for orders, for permission to be afraid. They had been silver-bound for decades, perhaps longer, and they had practiced for every possibility except this one, the possibility that the sound would actually come, the possibility that they were not the last word. The matriarch, after a long, terrible moment, drew herself up. "Then we are quick," she said. "We are quick, and we are gone before the wolves arrive. Take her now." The 30 pale figures came down the path at a run. Corvin moved. He went up the path with his sword drawn, and Cadron went up behind him, and the path was so narrow that the silver-bound could only come down 2 at a time, and Corvin met the first 2 on the bend above Serwyn, and the bend held. Serwyn turned away. She turned to face the sea. The tide had paused when she had made the sound. The tide was no longer pausing. The tide was beginning to move again, but it was not moving up. It was moving back. It was drawing down, fast, the way water draws down before a great wave, and Serwyn watched the shelf of stone at the bottom of the cliff emerge from the retreating water, and she watched the cave entrance at the back of the shelf widen, and she watched the cave entrance keep widening past the size it had been built to be, because the cave was answering her too. The stone mouth was opening for the Sungold's mother, and there was a light inside it. A warm gold light, the same light that had been inside Serwyn's chest when she had healed the dog, only larger. "Corvin!" she called. Above her on the path, Corvin was holding the bend. Cadron was a step behind him. "Corvin!" she called again. "The cave, it is open for us, now." He did not answer. He could not. He was holding the line. Serwyn made a decision. She started down the path. She started down with the dog beside her and her hand pressed to her belly and the small saddle blade at her thigh. And she did not call again to Corvin, because Corvin would come when he could come, and if she stayed where she was, she only became the thing he was buying time for. She went down the path fast. The dog went with her. She reached the shelf of stone at the bottom in less time than the path should have allowed, and the cave entrance was indeed larger than it had been built to be. And she stepped onto the shelf, and the shelf was dry, and the sea had drawn so far back that she could see the dark sand of the seabed beyond it. She turned. She looked up the path. Corvin was coming down. He had broken away from the line, and Kadrin was holding the bend alone now, and Corvin was coming down the path with his face wet, and his eyes the eyes of a man who had been told by his oldest friend to go. He reached her on the shelf. He did not stop. He swept her up, child and all, and carried her into the cave, and the dog ran in after them. And the moment the dog cleared the threshold, the cave began to close. It closed at the speed of a thing that had been waiting 200 years to close. The last thing Serwyn saw, through the closing mouth of the cave, was Kadrin on the path above, his sword raised, holding the bend, and she understood that Kadrin had bought the closing, and that Kadrin had known he was buying it, and that Kadrin had not been afraid. The cave closed. The dark inside was not dark. It was the warm gold light. It was everywhere. It was in the walls. It was in the air. It was in her own chest, pouring out of the place behind the place behind the place. And it was answering itself, the cave's light and her light, the way two notes from the same throat answer each other across a long room. Corvin set her down. He set her down very gently, on a flat place in the rock that seemed to have been waiting for her. He went to his knees beside her. His sword fell out of his hand, and he did not pick it up. He pressed his forehead to her belly, and his shoulders shook, and the gold in the cave moved into him through the place where his forehead pressed against her. And she felt, through the bond, every wall inside him come down at once. The child turned over. The child was not hiding any longer. The child was the warm gold light. The child had been the warm gold light all along, and the cave had only been answering what the child already was, and the silver bound on the cliff above could not reach the child here, because the cave was a place where the silver in their throats meant nothing. Serwyn, Corvin said into her belly. I know. Kadrin. I know. He told me to go. I know. He has been with me since I was 16. I know, my love, I know. She put her hands in his hair. She held him while he wept. She held him for a long time, longer than she could measure, because the cave had its own time, and it was a slow time and a kind one. Outside, the matriarch was no doubt standing on the cliff edge and beginning to understand that she had lost the long course on a single cliff path because she had let a queen find her own voice. Inside the cave, Corvin wept against Serwyn's belly, and Serwyn held him, and the child between them turned and turned and turned, content at last. After a long while, Corvin lifted his head. You called the wolves, he said. Yes. How? I do not know yet. The child showed me. The gold showed me. I will know later. Serwyn. Yes. You called the old wolves down out of the eastern mountains. They will be at the matriarch's gates within the week. The kingdom is going to change tonight. Not in 2 years. Tonight. I know. You did that. The child did that. I only opened my mouth. He looked at her. He said, there is a thing we have not done. A thing the bond between us has waited 3 years to do. I do not know if it can be done in here. I do not know if it can be done while you are carrying. But the bond is asking, Serwyn. The bond is asking very loudly. May I? She understood what he was asking. She had felt it for the last hour, since the cave had closed around them, the bond pressing toward a thing it had been refused for 3 years. The mutual claim. The thing she had only ever been the receiver of. The thing she had never been allowed to give back. She tilted her head. She bared her throat to him. Yes, she said. He bent over her. He pressed his mouth to the place where her neck met her shoulder. She felt his breath. She felt him hesitate, the way a man hesitates before a thing he has wanted his whole life and has refused himself, and she put her hand on the back of his head and pressed him gently down, and his teeth touched the soft place, and he claimed her. The bond unfolded between them. It was not pain. It was the warm gold light, doubled, tripled, the cave joining in, the child joining in. She saw, in the space of a single breath, Every night he had paced the floor of his chamber. She saw every letter he had written and not sent. She saw the night his brother had been taken from his side, the way the 14-year-old Corvan had sat in the chapel after the council had closed the door and had not been allowed to weep. She saw the morning Vitharis had come to him in secret with the sketch of a sleeping girl child. She saw his whole long, lonely, careful, loving life laid out in front of her like a road. And he saw hers. When he lifted his head, she turned her face up, and she pressed her mouth to the same place on his throat, and she did not hesitate. She had 3 years of hesitation behind her. Her teeth touched the soft place. She claimed him back. She felt the bond complete itself. The third strand. The thing the bond had wanted. The thing the silver bound had spent 200 years preventing in every other woman of her bloodline. The cave's light brightened. The child turned over. The child, for the first time, made a sound through the bond. It was not a word. It was the sound the gold made. It was a small, contented hum, the sound of a creature who had been waiting all its small life for both its parents to be in the same circle of light at the same time, and was now satisfied that they were. They stayed in the cave for 3 days, by their best count, although time inside the cave was not the time outside. They ate from a small store that had been laid in for them by Bray's people 2 centuries earlier and had been replenished, somehow, every season since. They slept curled together with the dog at their feet. They spoke. Corvan told her, at last, the long story he had said he would spend 2 years telling. He told it in 3 days, because there was time, and they were not running, and the cave was patient. They wept together for Kedron and for Vitharis and for Maris and Bray, and the widow with the gray hair, and they laughed twice, and the laughing surprised them both. On the 4th day, the cave opened. It opened on its own. It opened because the gold knew it was time. They walked out onto the shelf of stone, and the tide was low, and the sky above the cliff was clear, and the silver-bound were not on the path, and the legionaries were not in the village. The wolves were. The old wolves of the eastern mountains had come down. They had crossed the country in 3 days, which was a thing that should not have been possible, and they had reached Lentharn that morning, and they had filled the village and the cliffs and the dunes with their long gray bodies, and they had not come for blood. They had come because the Sungold's mother had called, and they had come to greet her, and they had come to escort her child home. The first wolf to step forward, when Serwyn and Corvan came up the cliff path, was a great old gray she-wolf with one milky eye, and the wolf bowed her head, and Serwyn knelt down in the grass at the cliff edge and put her forehead against the wolf's forehead, and the wolf sighed, the long, deep sigh of an animal who had been holding a long watch and was at last being relieved. Behind the she-wolf, 3,000 wolves bowed their heads. The kingdom changed that morning. The matriarch was gone from her chambers in the cathedral by the next morning. She had ridden north into the wastes alone, leaving behind a long letter addressed to no one, explaining her reasons. She had not asked forgiveness. She had only explained. No one ever saw her again. The letter was read to the council, and the council, looking at one another across the long table, understood that the long course they had been running for 200 years had ended without their having been told it was ending, and that the new shape of the kingdom was already in place around them, and that they were now sitting inside something they did not know how to govern. They did not try. Serwyn walked up the long aisle of the cathedral with her hand in her husband's hand and the one-eyed dog at her heels, and she was not crowned, because Sungolds and the mothers of Sungolds were not crowned. She was acknowledged. The high elder who would have crowned her instead bowed his head, and the wolves howled, and the kingdom became, in the space of a single morning, the thing it had been 200 years before. The kingdom whose heart was outside its body. The kingdom that did what the Sungold wanted because the kingdom loved the Sungold. The child was born in the spring. A daughter. A small dreaming creature with hair the color of sun on water, and eyes that were not any color the kingdom had a word for. She did not cry when she was born. She made the small, contented hum she had made through the bond on the night her parents had completed their claim. The midwives wept. The wolves outside the chamber howled. Corvin held her first. He held her the way he had not been able to hold his brother on the day his brother was taken, and Serwyn watched him hold her. And she understood that she had married a man who had been waiting his whole life to hold a small dreaming creature and had been told he was not allowed, and that this morning was the morning he was finally allowed. "What shall we name her?" he said. Serwyn had thought about it for months. "Erilyn," she said. "For your brother. For the wren. For the woman I was before they took me." He bowed his head. He could not speak. The daughter hummed. Outside the chamber, the wolves of the kingdom answered, 3,000 voices in a long, slow chorus. The chorus that had been waiting 200 years to be sung. The chorus the matriarch had spent her life trying to silence and had failed. In the end, to silence, because the kingdom had remembered itself, because a queen had found her voice on a cliff path, because a husband had loved his wife in letters he had not sent and had been forgiven anyway, because a small dreaming creature inside a belly had decided, in its own small way, that it was time. They had been very alone, the three of them, on different sides of the same wall, for a very long time. They were not alone any longer. And in the great kingdom that the council had spent 2 centuries pruning, the bloodlines began, very quietly, to lift their heads. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.